Alright, for section 8.1 homework help, I'm just going to take a look at one problem since this is very similar to what we've done in chapter 7. It's just working with the matrices instead of the actual systems and the variables. So, asking us to solve this system by using Gaussian elimination, which we, if you remember when we were talking about chapter 7, that's doing the row echelon form. So what they want us to do is they want us to switch this into an augmented matrix, which means I basically just drop all the variables, and then where I see the equal sign I put that row of dots. So it's going to be 2 for the x, minus 1 for the y, 3 for the z, and I have my row of dots showing that that's equal to 24. I have no x term in the second one. I have 2y, negative 1z, and equals 14, and then the last equation would be 7x minus 5y, no z's, equals 6. And so I've changed that system into an augmented matrix. And then in terms of your steps, everything is exactly the same. You still want to have a 1 in front of one of those three x's. So you think about how to do that. Well, I really don't want to divide because it would give me two fractions. It's not that I can't. It's just that the earlier you put fractions in, the harder it probably will be. You might notice that if you multiply that by negative 3, it would give you negative 6. Add to 7 would give you 1. So that's actually what I'm going to do. I'm going to multiply the top row by negative 3 and then add it to the last row. So negative 6 and 7 is going to give me 1. That's going to become positive 3 minus 5, or negative 2. Negative 9 plus 0, so negative 9. And then negative 3 times 24 is negative 72. Add 6 to it will give me negative 66. If you need to show your work on the side, again, there's nothing wrong with doing that. You're always welcome to do that. Alright, so that gave me my first equation with a 1. I never used the second equation, so I need to copy that one down. And then my last equation, it's up to me. I can either pick the first or the last. I used those two equations to make this new one, so I have to use one of these two as one of the three equations, but I don't need them both. So I'm going to pick the top one. No real reason other than that when I multiply this, I would multiply by negative 2 to get rid of this instead of negative 7. But they both will work. Alright, so I had to pick this one. My choice on which one I wanted to use for that one. Alright, so I got a 1 in front. Now my next step would be to get rid of these or have zeros here. Of course, I've already got the 0 there, so when I copy this next step down, I'm going to leave the first equation and second equation alone because they're the way I want them to be right now. That last equation, think about how do I get rid of it? Well, I want to use that 1 to get rid of this, so I'm going to multiply it by negative 2 and then add it to row 3. So negative 2 plus 2, that gives me 0. That's why we picked negative 2 in the first place. That'll become positive 4, negative 1, or 3. You have to be really careful with signs because it's easy to make a mistake with those. And I think you've got this system down. It's just easy to make little mistakes, which is kind of frustrating at times. Alright, so negative 2, that's going to give me positive 18 plus 3, or 21. And then that's going to end up, if I double this, it's going to be 132 plus 24, or that's 156. And again, feel free to show your work if you need to. Now, if you see this, it would be wonderful. If you don't, and I'm going to pretend like I don't, obviously that's divisible by 3. If I add those numbers together, it gives me 12, and since 12 is divisible by 3, I know that number is divisible by 3. It would make these numbers a lot easier to work with. I'm going to pretend like I don't see that, but if you do, I would probably do that. Alright, first two steps, I've accomplished goal number 1. I've got the 1 in front, and I've gotten rid of these. Now my next goal is to get a 1 in front of one of those numbers and get rid of the other one. So again, in my next step, copy down the first equation. That will not change. Second equation. Now what I'm going to do is think, how can I get a 1 with using those two numbers? Well, I can easily multiply that by negative 1 and add it to that, or take this, subtract that, whichever one you want, however you think of it. Just be careful when you do your subtracting. I'm going to do 0 minus 0, which is 0. 3 minus 2, which is 1. Of course, that's what we wanted. And here's what I'm talking about by being careful. It's 21 minus a negative 1, or 22. So be very careful when you're doing that. 156 minus 14 should give me 142. And now remember, I combined these two equations to get this new one, so it's my choice on whether I want to keep the last one or the second one. Well, obviously because of that number, I really would rather not have that, so I'm going to pick the second one to put here. And there we go. We did our next step and we got a 1 in front. Now the goal is to get rid of this 2. So write down another set of matrices. Always a good idea to try to do just one thing at a time when you're doing these matrices. I know when you look at it and you've got all this work, it's tempting to want to try to, in the same thing, say, well, how about if I multiply this by 3 and this by -2 and get rid of this? Said it's not wrong to do it. It's just the more things you try to do, the more likely you are to make a little mistake. So try to do one thing at a time if you can. If you do it, show your work on the side so I can see what it is that you're doing. All right, so let's multiply by -2 this time. So -2 times row 2 plus row 3. Again, make sure that you are telling me what you're doing. All right, so I've got 0 plus 0. It's going to give me a 0. That's why these two need to be 0 before I move over to here so that these numbers won't change. -2 plus 2 gives me 0. That's why we picked -2. That's going to give me -42 minus 1, or -45. That's not great that we have such a big number, but it's not much we can do about it. -2 times 142 is going to give me -284. I then add 14 to that, and that should end up giving me -270. Again, don't be afraid to show your work. I can see that ends in a 5, that ends in a 0. Chances are those are both divisible by 5. It ends up working out that that's actually -45 goes into this 6 times evenly. If you need to divide it out by hand, that's great. Hopefully your numbers won't get to be quite that large so you can see it a little bit easier. So this is where, to save ourselves a step, we'll just say that this is 1 and then 6. Or you can do it like this. Alright, that means that z is equal to 6. And now start back substituting. Remember that that stands for y plus 22z, so 22 times 6 is equal to 142. Multiplying these together gives me 132. Subtract, and I get y is equal to 10. And now go back to the original equation, or at least the first equation we have here. That stands for x minus 2 times y, which is 10, minus 9 times z, which is 6, equals -66. Or x, I guess that's minus 20 minus 54 is equal to -66. Looks like that's 74. If I add 74 to both sides, I end up with 8. And so my answer is 8, 10, 6. And that is the set of numbers that will solve this system of equations. Again, very similar. Basically, it's the exact same thing, other than you don't have variables when you're going through your steps. So hopefully by now you've kind of got that system down. All right, that's homework help for 8.1. If you need extra help, by all means, feel free to come in and ask for help.